Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to tell you a story. Picture yourself in the beautiful setting of an Alaskan fjord with snow-capped, steep, forested mountains plunging down to meet icy, clear, cold ocean waters. Imagine that you're living in an isolated cabin nestled in the forest where one of those mountains meets the sea. It is winter, really, and there's snow on the ground. And you've just put another log on the fire to keep your cabin cozy and warm. And now imagine that it starts to rain, and then it pours all night, melting all that snow. And finally, imagine that the slope behind your cabin comes crashing down. This is exactly what happened in December 2020 when an atmospheric river hit the community of Haines, Alaska, initiating dozens of landslides and affecting more than a third of the residents. When it was light enough to see, people ventured outside to find water gushing everywhere, roads washed out, landslides hitting houses, and blocking critical roads. And just when they thought the storm was over, the devastating Beach Road landslide occurred, taking the lives of two beloved community members. This is not an isolated event. In 2015, debris flow caused 3 fatalities in Sitka, and that was caused by an atmospheric river. In 2023, a landslide in Wrangell took the lives of 6 people, including an entire family of 5. And in 2024, another fatal landslide occurred in Ketchikan. So I've lived in Alaska for over 30 years, and while I admit that my memory's not the best, I don't remember fatal landslides happening before 2015. And so that led me to ask the question, are the number of fatalities increasing through time in Alaska due to landslides? What exactly is the history of landslides in Alaska? So first, since we're so far away, let's get acquainted with the state. Here it is relative to Canada and Russia, and since we're in the great Commonwealth of Kentucky, here's Kentucky for scale. So I couldn't resist that. Alaska's pretty big, but I also want to acknowledge that the people of Kentucky are dealing with the aftermath of their own extreme climate event with widespread flooding and associated fatalities, and so you're in my thoughts. So let me take you down the rabbit hole of research. And I must preface by saying that what I will present here is still really preliminary. There is more digging to do. So I looked at 2 online databases that queried 14 Alaskan newspapers going back to 1898, as well as the New York Times. I searched keywords like landslide, mudslide, and Alaska, and excluded words like election and win and victory, because the word landslide is used so much in our lexicon for things other than the mass movement events that I wanted. And this resulted in over 4,000 records. I looked at each one of those because despite my search parameters, a lot of election results showed up. So here are some notable politicians through time. The word landslide is also used for big savings. It was a Parker Brothers board game. It was the name of a movie in the 90s. And for those of you old enough to remember, 1975 was when Fleetwood Mac released their self-titled album containing the hit Landslide, back when you could buy an LP for $3.99 at Fred Meyer. So in this analysis, I excluded landslides that happened out in the vastness of the state, away from people and roads. I excluded submarine landslides and landslides caused by construction activities. What I did include was the date on which a landslide happened, the region in which it happened, the probable trigger, if that was noted in the article, and any fatalities or reported injuries. This resulted in 153 landslides. So let's see where they occurred. Here's a map of Alaska with the climate divisions, and again, I must stress, this is preliminary data. So here are the landslides clustered on top. Some regions had no landslides, like the North Slope or Bristol Bay, and others had quite a few. Well, how does that compare to roads and where people live? Here's a map of Alaska's road system with the population on top as a heat map, and now here are those clusters of landslides. Well, given my rules on what was included and what wasn't, sure, it makes sense there'd be a strong correlation between reported landslides and infrastructure. Now, if we look at landslides through time, the early part of the record, Alaska had 10 or fewer landslides per decade, until about the 1980s, when the number of reported landslides steadily increased. And note that my study ended in the fall of 2024, and already we're the second highest in the number of reported landslides, and we're not even halfway through the decade yet. For triggers, rain is the biggest culprit. But then it's important to note that freeze-thaw events and warm conditions started to appear in about the 1990s. Now, in terms of fatalities, this big event in 1936 happened when a rain-induced landslide killed 15 people in Juneau, and it still remains Alaska's most fatal landslide. So these data suggest that the number of fatalities really aren't increasing over time. But what about the number of fatal landslides? So here those are. Really, they're coming. Alaska had 2 or fewer fatal landslides per decade until the 2020s, when we're up to 3. And again, we're not even halfway through the decade. So while these data suggest that while the number of fatalities haven't increased over time, the number of fatal landslides have, albeit slightly. So you might be wondering how that compares to Alaska's population, and so did I. And I do want to point out that the y-axis on the right is multiplied by 1,000. We have more than 800 people who live in the state. So the trends are similar, right? Well, let's take it more granularly and break this down by climate division. So this is a busy graph, but hopefully you can see that for some divisions, the number of landslides stay pretty steady through time, whereas others have an increase in reported landslides starting again in about the 1980s. Now, if you take the number of reported landslides per climate division and normalize those to population, this big peak pops out right away. And that's for the first 4 years in the 2020s for the North Panhandle region of Southeast Alaska. Another noteworthy trend is this increase for the South Panhandle region of Southeast Alaska. So hold on to those thoughts for a little bit. Now, to go back to the landslides that are triggered by freeze-thaw events and warm conditions, we have to talk about permafrost. So here is a map of Alaska's permafrost distribution. Continuous permafrost, which is frozen nearly everywhere, quite deeply and cold, is in blue. Discontinuous permafrost is patchy in extent and close to thawing, and that's shown in green. And the rest of the state has sporadic or no permafrost at all. And on top of that, we have the reported landslides. So now, the little green snowflakes are the landslides caused by freeze-thaw events, and then the little red flames are the landslides caused by warm conditions. So hold on to that thought a little bit. Let's talk about climate. My colleagues at the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy provided me with this figure, which illustrates the change in average annual air temperature in degrees Fahrenheit for the last 50 years. Your eyes might be drawn right away to the North Slope with that bright red patch, which has warmed a lot. But most of Alaska has seen an increase in air temperature of 2 to 3 degrees since 1975. And also noteworthy is this warm patch over Southeast Alaska, which has warmed 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 50 years. So now let's put this all together. Here again is that air temperature map. And now we can start to see a correlation between, there we go, warmer air temperatures and landslides that are triggered in permafrost. We can also see that warmer air temperatures cause more, arrows will come, more freeze-thaw events when the ground used to just be frozen in the winter, and those are happening along the coastal areas. For Southeast Alaska, warmer air can hold more moisture, producing heavier and more extreme rain events. And that helps to describe the trends that we see in that area of the state. So to summarize, the number of fatal landslides in Alaska are increasing. And this is probably due to warmer temperatures and the related increased precipitation. Landslides are going to occur regardless of politics. And yes, I did put the words climate and change together in the title of this presentation. I recommend that we as engineers do what we do best and look at the data and analyze the trends that we see there, and then produce data-driven solutions, but with an eye towards what the future holds, because, quoting ASCE's Code of Ethics, we'll do this to first and foremost protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Such an approach would help those Alaskan communities that I told you about today, as well as the people of Kentucky with the next extreme rain event. And this QR code would take you to a story map that tells about the Haines landslides in 2020. And I want to thank you for listening to my story.